at 5:30, and we're going to come in from that closed session, finish that business up, and start our regular meeting. May I have a motion to return to open session?
Sir, I move the School Board of City of Manassas return to open session.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Demaria, second by Mrs. Kiefer, that present.
Chairman Williams,
Aye.
Vice Chairwoman Kiefer,
Aye.
Mr. Demaria,
Aye.
Mr. Albrecht, Mrs. Seberg,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
and Mrs. Stevens.
Aye.
Either aye.
Sir, you want to move for certification?
Yes.
I move that the school board certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed, and only such public business matters were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened, were heard, discussed, or considered.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Demaria, second by Mrs. Williams, that the school board certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed, and only such public business matters were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened, were heard, discussed, or considered. May I have a roll call vote, please, Ms. Garza?
Yes, Chairman Williams,
Aye.
Vice Chairwoman Kiefer,
Aye.
Mr. Demaria,
Aye.
Mr. Albrecht,
Aye.
Mrs. Seberg,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mrs. Stevens.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garza. The ayes have it 7-0. The meeting is certified. Next, may I have a motion for SPUE 1920-05, please?
Mr. Chair, I move that the school board of the city of Manassas denies the superintendent's recommendation to expel student STUE 1920-05. Second.
Motion by Ms. Kiefer, and see the second, I think, Ms. Seberg, that the school board, no, it's not Seberg. Who's the second from? Stevens.
Stevens.
I can see you all. Motion by Kiefer, second by Stevens, that the school board of the city of Manassas denies the superintendent recommendation to expel SPUE 1920-05. May I have a roll call vote, please, Mrs. Garza?
Yes, Chairman Williams,
Aye.
Vice Chairwoman Kiefer,
Aye.
Mr. Demaria,
Aye.
Mr. Albrecht,
I will abstain because I think everybody knows I heard about every other word on this particular portion and was not able to speak.
okay, Mrs. Seberg,
Ms. Seberg was not part of that closed meeting, so we will speak over her, please. Thank you.
okay, sure. Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Stevens,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garza. By 4 ayes, 1, was it Ms. That's an aye? We clarify Mr. Williams' vote, please.
Aye.
Okay. Vote of 5-0. The motion passes with 1 abstention from Mr. Albrecht. And Ms. Seberg did not participate in that closed meeting. So 5-0, 1 abstention. Thank you all very much. May I have a motion for SPUE 1819-02, please?
Mr. Chair, I move that the school board of the city of Manassas deny readmission for student STUE 1819-02.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Kiefer, second by Mr. Demaria, that the school board of the city of Manassas deny the readmission for student STUE 1819-02. May I have a roll call vote, please, Mr. Garza?
Chairman Williams,
Aye.
Vice Chairwoman Kiefer,
Aye.
Mr. Demaria,
Aye.
Mr. Albrecht, Mr. Albrecht,
Aye.
Mrs. Stevens,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mrs. Stevens.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garza. The ayes have it 7-0, the motion carries. And finally, to close out this part of the meeting, we have a motion for adjournment.
Mr. Chair, I move that the school board of the city of Manassas adjourn.
Second.
Motion from Kiefer, and that was it.
Oh.
Was there a second?
Second.
I seconded, and I think Mr. Demaria did as well.
Kiefer, second by Mr. Okay. Kiefer, second by Mrs. Williams. Portion of the closed meeting session. May I have a roll call vote, please, Mrs. Garza?
Yes, Chairman Williams. Chairman Williams,
He might be frozen.
yes. Chairman Williams, can you hear me?
Aye.
Vice Chairwoman Kiefer,
Aye.
Mr. Demaria,
Aye.
Mr. Albrecht,
Aye.
Mrs. Seaborn,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mrs. Stevens.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Garza. The ayes have it, and we are adjourned. Now we will enter to our regularly scheduled meeting at 7 o'clock. Welcome to all of you who are here on my screen that I can see, and all of you are watching online. Thanks for coming tonight. We will have a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. And before we have the moment of silence, I want to let everyone know that we are meeting tonight. Special meeting. The meeting is conducted virtually, is authorized by Virginia Code Section 2.2-3708.2A3 due to the restrictions on of the United States of America, and to the stand one nation under God, indivisible, is for all.
Chairman Williams,
Aye. Here.
Vice Chairwoman Kiefer,
Here.
Vice Chairwoman Kiefer.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Demaria,
Here.
Mr. Albrecht,
Here.
Mrs. Seaborn,
Here.
Mrs. Williams,
Here.
Mrs. Stevens.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Did you all hear that? Are there any additions and corrections to the agenda?
Yes, sir. I would like to add under action agenda an item to add Dr. Brent as the designee to act in the absence of the superintendent.
Thank you very much. Agenda, citizens' comments. I believe
I just want to make sure he did say citizens' comments, correct? Okay.
Yes, he did.
Okay. Ms. Garza, you tell me when to start, please.
I'm calling him right now. Give me just 1 second, please. Mrs. Radford, you can go ahead and start.
Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Our first citizens' comment is from Jennifer White. Good afternoon. I am an MCPS parent of a child, and I need to know why no one is taking into consideration parents who work full-time jobs and cannot afford to risk their income or livelihood. My child always comes first, but without my job, I won't have a home, a car, food, clothing, or anything to provide to my child to keep her safe, alive, and thriving. This is giving me complete and total anxiety. Just because we live in Northern Virginia does not mean we can all survive on simply one income. I have to rely on school and after-school care to simply provide for my child. What happens to us? I truly feel like you're not considering us. You'll read our comments, but then nothing will be done about it. Retail employees are required to wear masks and work an 8-hour shift or more sometimes. Teachers should be required to do the same. Retail workers are at risk simply by being subjected to random people on a daily basis. These teachers and their classes would experience the same people every day. As long as their health is maintained and constantly checked, I don't see the issue here. We need to go back to work, and so should teachers. I simply cannot afford to miss work and also cannot afford the obnoxious fees daycares charge. I'm working my heart out to provide, and now this is just another thing I have to worry about. Open the schools. Ms. Garza, are you ready for the second one? Okay. This one is,
Yeah, thank you.
okay, just paying attention to the time, okay. This one is from Nadine Moscoso. Thoughts, questions on school openings. If a teacher tests positive for COVID-19, are they required to quarantine for 2 to 3 weeks? Is their sick leave covered or paid? If that teacher has 5 classes a day with 30 students each, do all 150 of those students need to then stay home and quarantine for 14 days? Do all 150 of those students now have to get tested? Who pays for those tests? Are they happening at school? How are the parents being notified? Does everyone in each of these kids' families need to get tested? Who pays for that? What if someone who lives in the same house as a teacher tests positive? Does that teacher now need to take 14 days off of work to quarantine? Is that time off covered or paid? Where is the district going to find a substitute teacher who will work in a classroom full of exposed, possibly infected students for substitute pay? Substitutes teach in multiple schools. What if they are diagnosed with COVID-19? Do all the kids in each school now have to quarantine and get tested? Who's going to pay for that? What if a student in your kid's class tests positive? What if your kid tests positive? Does every other student and teacher then have been around quarantine? Do we all get notified who is infected and when? Or because of HIPAA regulations, are parents and teachers just going to get mysterious, may have been in contact emails all year long? What is this stress going to do to our teachers? How does it affect their health and well-being? How does it affect their ability to teach? How does it affect the quality of education they are able to provide? What is it going to do to our kids? What are the long-term effects of consistently being stressed out? How will it affect students and faculty when the first teacher in their school dies from this? The first parent of a student who brought it home, the first kid. How many more people are going to die that otherwise would not have if we had stayed home longer? 30% of teachers in the US are over 50. About 16% of the total deaths in the US are people between the ages of 45 to 65. We are choosing to put our teachers and students in danger. There has to be a solid plan for safety moving forward. Thank you. Comment number 3, Ben Johnson. Chairman Williams, school board members, and Dr. Newman, thank you for continuing to take input from staff and family members regarding MCPS's plans for the 2021 school year. I know that the decision you have to make is a difficult one with many variables to consider, and any decision reached is likely to make a majority of the people unhappy. I wanted to express my thanks especially to Mrs. Seberg and Mr. DeMaria, who both reached out to me in response to the letter I sent to the board. I appreciate their recognition of how important it is for parents and staff to feel as if they are heard. Before I sat down to write this letter, I was looking at a news site that shows trend lines for COVID-19 cases in each state. When I reached Virginia, it was very easy to pinpoint the exact date that the state started to open up. Our flattened curve has taken a sharp turn up. I know that our region so far has not seen the same increase, but I also know that we delayed our move to phase 2. It is not unreasonable to think we're going to start seeing cases rise here as well. I am one of the 31% of the parents who indicated in the survey I will be choosing the 100% online option should option 2 be chosen. As such, I continue to be extremely concerned and unhappy with the instructional model that MCPS has presented for option 4. My family has some experience with one of the online instructional delivery systems that MCPS uses because my son did not have a science teacher for most of his 8th grade year. My son finished that year having gained very little academically and talked about how he hated science, which had previously been one of his favorite subjects. It is unacceptable to me that we would relegate a third or more of our students at MCPS to a second-class level of instruction without any teacher instruction and potentially without even the oversight of an MCPS instructor just because their parents value their health. Considering that as many as 50% of MCPS staff stated that they would be at high risk from COVID-19, why not have those teachers provide the majority of instruction for our virtual students? Or have live in-person classes also attended virtually by students? If you value the instruction that we as teachers provide to students, you should require that instruction for all students, regardless of what option parents choose. I do not personally feel that it is safe at this time for any of us to return to school. I am considered high risk by the CDC, and the only department that hasn't answered my questions yet is HR. So I have no idea how the district will be handling my situation. My children will almost certainly be staying home. So I asked the school board that you choose the hybrid model. You ensure the district is providing equitable, is it time?
No,
Okay.
not yet.
All right, equitable instruction to all our students, including live instruction from an MCPS teacher. As parents, I believe we have the right to expect that from our district. Thank you. Jen Johnson, 2nd grade teacher, Weems Elementary. I believe this is our 4th and final one that was submitted. From Francie Vanderveer. As a parent of 3 MCPS students, a citizen of Manassas City for 19 years, and a former MCPS teacher for 16 years, I would like to address the 2020-21 school reopening of schools. I understand many facets of the debate before us. As a parent, I want my children to see their friends and interact with their teachers, even with all of the necessary safety requirements in place. As a teacher, I want to be with my students. I miss them immensely. As a citizen, I want our city to minimize occurrences of COVID-19 by social distancing and wearing masks when in public places. She provides a screenshot that says, as of Thursday, July 9th, Manassas City ranked 2nd in the state with 3,582.8 cases per 100,000 residents, while Manassas Park ranked 8th with 2,603.3, and Prince William County ranked 12th with 1,646 per 100,000 residents. The city of Manassas is not in a position to risk the lives and health of its citizens. When reopening schools, we put everyone at risk. Below are my arguments for starting the school year virtually. Children may be carriers and may infect other students and staff members. Economy. Many people are already working from home, If even one person gets sick in a family, someone will have to stay home from work. The family may face endless medical expenses. Virus, possible death, long-term effects for many people with lifelong, life-altering effects. It is my request that we begin the school year virtually and reevaluate the second semester. Nobody's life is worth the risk. Sincerely, Francie Vanderveer, Manassas resident. That's all.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bradford. And I've switched to my laptop, so even though it's the old laptop, hopefully works better than my brand new computer. But anyhow, thank you very much for those statements. And we want to tell everyone who submitted statements that we truly did go through all the feedback and we really appreciate it. It's been invaluable to help us make this very, very tough decision. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. May I have a motion, please, for the consent agenda?
Mr. Chair, I move that the school board of the city of Manassas approve the consent agenda as modified. Second.
Motion by Mrs. Seabird, second by Mrs. Stevens, that the school board of the city of Manassas approve the consent agenda as modified. Did you say it's modified? As presented.
As presented.
As presented. Got it. Roll call vote, please, Mrs. Garza.
Yes, Chairman Williams,
Aye.
Vice Chairwoman Kiefer,
Aye.
Mr. Demaria,
Aye.
Mr. Albrecht,
Aye.
Mrs. Seaver,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mrs. Stevens.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Garza. The ayes have it 7-0. The consent agenda is passed. Next on the agenda is the action agenda. And the first item on that is designee of the division superintendent to act in his absence. And I guess I'll just read this before I get a motion. So in accordance with section 22.1-69 and section 22.1-76 of the Code of Virginia, the division superintendent is recommending that Dr. Melissa Saunders, primary designee, and Dr. Eric Brent, alternate designee, be appointed by the school board as the primary and alternate designees of the superintendent during his absence or inability to perform for the period of July 1, 2020 to the 2021 organizational meeting. The proposed revised resolution, R 2020-01, identifies the primary and alternate designees per section 22.1-69 and 22.176 as defined. May I have a motion, please?
Sir, I move that the school board of the city of Manassas approve the revised resolution R 2020-01 designating Dr. Melissa Saunders and Dr. Eric Brent to act in the superintendent's absence for the period of July 1, 2020 to the 2021 organizational meeting.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Demaria, second by Mr. Albrecht, that the school board of the city of Manassas approve the revised resolution R 2020-01 designating Dr. Melissa Saunders and Dr. Eric Brent to act in the superintendent's absence for the period of July 1, 2020 to the 2021 organizational meeting. Mrs. Garza, first, is there any discussion? There's no discussion? Garza, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Chairman Williams,
Aye.
Vice Chairwoman Kiefer,
Aye.
Mr. Demaria,
Aye.
Mr. Albrecht,
Aye.
Mrs. Seaver,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Stevens.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Garza. The ayes have it 7-0 and the motion carries. And the next and last substantive item on our agenda, the biggest, no doubt, reopening of Manassas City Public Schools for the 2021 school year. And I will just tee it off like this. Superintendent Dr. Kevin Newman recommends that the board approve one of the following proposed plans for the reopening of the Manassas City Public Schools for the school year 2020-2021, and for the division to submit the school board approved plans to the Virginia Department of Education, VDOE. These plans were under discussion during the school board special meeting held on July 8th, 2020 at 6:00 p.m. During this meeting, the following options for reopening were discussed. Option 1, reopen school for full in-person learning utilizing minimal operational adjustments to adhere to federal, state, and local guidance. Option 2, reopen school with a combination of in-person learning and distance learning to adhere to federal, state, and local guidance. And that option has a 25% return option and a 50% return option. Option 3, reopen school with full distance learning. And option 4, parent selected 100% distance learning option. This option is not available if the board selects option 1 or option 2. So to start this off, I'm going to ask for a motion, and whatever the motion is, we're going to have discussion. So it doesn't really matter which option you preface your motion with, because we'll have a discussion and then go back and amend it or change it if we need to.
Sir, I'll make a motion. I move that the school board of the city of Manassas approve option 3.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. DeMaria, second by Mrs. Seberg, that the school board of the city of Manassas approve option 3, reopen school with full distance learning. This is a rhetorical question, but is there any discussion? I'm sure there is. And to start off, what I'm going to do for all board members, I know all board members have comments. So the first part of the discussion, I'm going to ask you if any questions. So I will go around starting with Mr. Albrecht and going around asking if any questions of staff before we have our statements or other discussion. So we'll start out and preface it with any questions. After questions, we'll go to comments and other discussion. So I'll start with Mr. Albrecht, then go around. Mr. Albrecht, do you have any questions of staff?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I had submitted mine. I read all the ones that were online. The question that was really a little vague, and I'd like to maybe delve more into, deals with option 3. It's a radical transformation of how we deliver instruction today. And to me, that implies there are a lot of things that we would not be doing. We would have a significantly reduced transportation schedule, recognizing we still have special education, LEP. We'd have significantly less use of the buildings and significantly less food service. And my question is, I can't in good I'll start it with, I can't in good conscience suggest that we would employ everybody at 100% as a fiduciary, recognizing what our role as a board is. So has staff considered what the impact is, and would we be furloughing people? Do we need to make that decision for a year? Is it a half year? Because I recognize we can't hold people week to week, and that's going to present a potential startup risk as well.
Mr. Albrecht, we have had those discussions, and if you look at how we closed the year, we tried to make as many of our employees whole as possible to prevent loss of income for them and their family. When it comes to a decision for moving forward, if option 3 is selected, we would seek guidance from the board on how you would want us to move forward with employees that are not fulfilling a 100% of their duties. I know that a question has come up and will come up later by another board member about the special education piece of it. So I'll just go ahead and delve into that now, because that will help answer your question. We did include some of our special education students, as well as some of our level 1 and level 2 students, for some in-person instruction. We did that for several reasons, but the main reason, if you look at the phased reopening of schools by the governor, which I believe is on slide 2, you'll see the emphasis of getting our special education students some in-person time. If that is not the will of the board due to safety, we totally understand that. We were just trying to fulfill the guidance of the governor at the time when we were making that plan. Then we would not have transportation or food service besides the food service cost that it would, as we would love to continue our meal service for breakfast and lunch that we're currently having now, where we serve meals for the week. So I guess in order to answer that question, I would need to know the will of the board on if you want in-person special education services as well as for our level 1 and level 2 ESOL students.
Mr. Albrecht?
I think that's the board relative to who we're going to serve at what level. And I certainly am not going to speak for the board.
Okay.
So
maybe it would be helpful if folks address that when we make our comments going forward. So we'll continue with questions now. Mr. Albrecht, any other questions?
So I guess to follow on that, and listening to some of the comments we've received and some of the questions we had as we talk about classes that are heavily intensive of labs, we seem to say we can deliver instruction virtually for a lot of students. And I gotta believe if you can take a chemistry physics lab online and not have the test tubes and not have the Bunsen burners and not have the frog to dissect or whatever these specific lab, and those are scientific ones, there's others as well, and the computers are, if I'm going to take an automotive repair class, if I'm going to take that online and not go fixing a carburetor, then I guess we ought to use that same standard for everybody. So I'll get to, because the question I did ask is, did we think about that? The answer I understand is we believe most instruction can be delivered virtually. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And Dr. Saunders was the one who responded to that question. So I'll ask her if she has any additional information to share.
So yes, I did respond to that question, and our preliminary look at all of our courses, we have lots of options through a virtual method to be able to have our teachers provide instruction to those standards in all of those courses. Certainly, each one's going to have to be looked at specifically if we are going in that direction at the high school level in particular, as there might be one or two that aren't offered in a platform that we can't figure out how to do virtually. But for example, cosmetology, we've had a conversation about students picking up their kits and taking their kits home and working through them and with Ms. Dotavala through a virtual method. So there are ways for us to do that. And certainly there will be ways for us to service all of our students. We will find those ways if virtually is the primary method.
I want to get this on the record because I know the question was answered, but I know a lot of parents and a lot of people in the community are concerned about this. The question was asked, would we comply with CDC recommendations, state requirements, etc., if we did a full return to school, i.e. option 1? I believe the answer was no, we could not. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
So just putting it out there, that kind of makes that untenable to me. Mr. Chair, that's all the clarifications I had because I did submit a few, as everybody knows.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Albrecht. Next up for questions or clarifications, Mr. DeMaria.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to hit on a couple of what Mr. Albrecht also talked about. the labs and can they be, the instructions go through virtually? Yes, they can, I believe. But just like every other class that we're going to have, if it's all virtual, it's not going to be as effective. Math is not going to be as effective as having a teacher in front of a student. Auto tech is not going to be as effective as having a teacher in front of a student. I think it can be done. I think it, especially by the group that we've got, it can be done. But I'm not convinced that it's going to be done as well. I know I'm convinced it won't be done as well, but it'll have to be done as well as we possibly can. And Scott, as far as if we furlough these folks, you're right. We are dealing with taxpayer dollars here, and if we have people not able to completely do their job, would it be the right thing to do for us to furlough them for the time being? Problem is, if they get another job, one of my questions is, if we take option 3 here, and then all of a sudden, miraculously this goes away, because somebody said that might happen sometime back in March or something. Somebody said that. But if it does go away, or we get a surge down, or if we find a vaccine, we meaning smarter people than us, if that happens, we're going to want to get back to school. And if these folks that we furlough have other jobs, we may be having a hard time getting back to school. My goal is to get back to school 100%, whether that's in October, January, or next August. I don't know when it's going to be, but I think that's got to be everybody's goal, and we've got to be ready to meet that goal when the time comes. As far as meal service goes, I'm just hitting on what was hit on just a second ago. Meal service, absolutely, it's got to continue. Our kids cannot go hungry. And on option 3, all of our kids are going to have to come in and pick up their computers. I would love the idea, and every time I think of something and ask the question, staff has already thought of it, and that's very reassuring to me. But I would love it if, when they come in, we can make appointments for these kids to come in the first week of school or whenever it is, and meet with their teacher, 3 or 4 at a time, so that it can be absolutely socially distanced. Everything could be safe. The teacher may be able to give some in-person instruction on how to get online and what they're going to be doing, even if it's for just a couple hours per kid, 3 or 4 kids at a time. And then my biggest situation with that is kindergartners, first graders. Their teachers are their dads or their moms. They feel like they have such a connection to them, and I don't know that they'll be able to make that connection over this Zoom meeting that we've got going on right now, or whatever it is, Bobby, Zoom-like meeting right now. If there's any way that we could bring kids in, even on option 3, at a very limited number for a very limited time, in order to at least see their teacher in person, so they can make that connection, because teaching is so much about connections, and it'll be very hard to make a connection over this platform here. Would that be a possibility? I've got other questions, but I'll let that one be. My others were statements. That's a question. Is there any way that might be an option for when we do hand out our all of the laptops or the tablets?
So Dr. Newman, I'll go ahead and answer that if you're good with that. So absolutely, I think that our team is ready to facilitate whatever kind of process we can come up with to distribute devices, to distribute the hotspots if needed, materials, library books, things that students might need in any of the options. Our team is ready to go. We are already working on trainings for parents, trainings for staff. All of that is in the process of going on. So I'm certain that we will work with our principals to facilitate an orientation type of experience for our students, to orient them to not only the platforms, but to the people that they'll be talking to on those platforms. It may take more than a week. I will have to say that. I can't say that at the high school level that we would get that done in a week with the number of students that we have to serve at the high school. So the timing, I can't quite give you an exact timing on that, but I do know that that is certainly a part of our conversation going on.
Thank you, Dr. Saunders. Yeah, and I just threw the week out there as, I wasn't expecting that. And again, I was expecting the answer that I got, an answer that this group has been prepared for, because they've been prepared for everything else that's been thrown at them so far. And I don't know who to direct this one to. Option 4's got me a little perplexed if we don't go with option 3. What would that option look like for a parent if they chose that under any of our options? What would that look like for our students and our parents? I don't know who wants to answer that.
So Dr. Newman, are you good with, I'll jump in on that one as well. So a couple of things I would say about option 4. Option 4 is really only available if option 1 or 2 was selected. Obviously in option 3, if everyone's virtual, we're using our staff and our processes. So I would refer people to slide 72 in the very long slideshow, which kind of highlights the opt-in option for parents. We would, so a couple of clarifications I would make around that. Number 1, students would be assigned a teacher at the elementary level or teachers at the secondary level. Students, we would, based on the numbers and the families that were choosing this, we would be able to, in some places, utilize our own staff. And in other places, we'd have to use some additional resources and supplement with staff outside. You'll see on slide 72, I think, is that the, nope, let me try a different one. Can you go back one more, Alba? That one, 71, I was wrong. So when possible, again, we would utilize our own staff to see student progress and do the teaching. We would have to be very aware of what elective choices we might offer during that process. And finally, students would work through some different platforms. We listed a couple of platforms on there. If they weren't working directly with one of our Manassas City Public Schools teachers, they might be working in Virtual Virginia, which is K-12 and is being widely used across the Commonwealth both during the closure in the spring and now in the fall. Many of our school systems are using that, and it's vetted by the Virginia Department of Education. Students are assigned a certified teacher in Virtual Virginia, and they work through the courses in Virtual Virginia. We also, we currently use Edmentum at the high school. There are options for Edmentum, which also does have what's something called Ed Options, which is, again, assigned a live teacher, a certified teacher, and the Edmentum courses are vast. There are a lot of options within Edmentum. So something that we might not be able to get through Manassas City or with a Manassas City teacher could be offered through Edmentum. And then we have Calvert Learning, which is K-5. And again, it is a teacher that's assigned to a student, again, certified teachers to work through all of the programs and the processes with kids. I will just clarify that the reason why it seems a little confusing is we don't know the exact number of students and families that would make this choice. So obviously, if those kids come out of the in-person learning, then teachers' schedules may or may not be able to be freed up for them to teach virtual. So it's really dependent on the number of students. We would first primarily assign our teachers to those students that are in person in a hybrid model, the 25% or the 50%. And then we would assign those teachers to any virtual options if they had additional time in their schedule. We anticipate that at the elementary level, most of our teachers will be able to be used in both of those ways, and potentially at the high school level as well. So I hope that clarifies a little bit, but I wanted to make sure that we address that it is not just online learning without any support from a live teacher or certified teacher.
Thank you, Dr. Saunders. I appreciate that. And again, it's nice to be able to ask a question and know that somebody, you, are going to be able to have an answer for me. On my next question, and my last one for this, I guess this is the right time for this. I am worried about SPED. I made a motion for option 3 because I don't get scared very often, but I'm scared right now. I'm scared for the health of our children and our staff, and part of that is SPED. And I know that we have to find that fine line between safety for our staff and our kids and giving the instruction and the needs that SPED kids need. So I'm just concerned about, I don't know if there's an answer for this, but if we do go with option 3 and we do have SPED kids come into the building, I am concerned about teacher safety and the child's safety. And I am 100% confident that we will take all the precautions that we possibly can. But I just want to let you know that is a concern for me, and it is a concern for SPED teachers. I've had a number of SPED teachers contact me or us. I've had so much contact, I don't know where the contact has come from, because with all the Let's Talk and the emails and the phone calls and everything else, I'm not sure where these all came from, but it does raise a concern for me. And then there's also a week-long PD set up for SPED teachers, and I just want to make sure that they're going to have enough time to get everything else they've got ready, need to get ready in such a crazy year that that week-long of PD doesn't infringe on that. And that's all I have, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Maria. Mrs. Kiefer, any questions you have on anything at all dealing with any of the options?
Okay, great. Thank you for the clarification. I wanted to make sure if I was sticking to option 3 right now, but I will start with a question on it, just based on the motion alone, to ensure that I know, sort of what we're saying here. It doesn't seem to say we would revisit it at any time. There might be an implication that's been out there that we could, but I think if we're voting on something, we should be clear if there's, so I guess my question actually is, we saw that there's a plan for if we go with number 4, that parents would be allowed to reassess at the end of a semester. Do we have the same type of plan if we pivoted or had to get together again to make a definitive decision, say at the end of the semester as a board, again, to go back in or not, or to remain virtual? I don't think we've seen that. So I just wanted to put out there, what is it we're saying as we discuss option 3?
I can jump in really quick. I spoke with Dr. Newman about this. And one thing I want to suggest is, no matter which option that we choose to vote on that ultimately prevails, that we insert in that option that every month we will look at the option that we picked and reevaluate. And I think the easiest way to do that, and this is just something I thought of the top of my head, maybe the first meeting of each month, we look at where we are. So not even as a long a period of time as 9 weeks. I think that's too long. I think doing it every 4 weeks, we can have it as an agenda item, reevaluation, and it's going to take time, but that's what we're here for. Reevaluation of the options, look at where we are, where we're going, because I think, we can all understand that when you have inertia sometimes, if a ball starts going a certain way, things just tend to roll that way, and I don't want to get stuck. And I know you want to get stuck with doing the same thing without doing the best that we can for all our children, our families, and our staff. So that's a great point. And I think that our motion should be amended to say something like that, so we address that head on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's really helpful, because that's been weighing on my mind in all this, to be honest. Another point I just wanted for clarification for the purposes of the record, I've heard, but haven't heard from the folks here, that we don't have enough money to do the in-school, in-person version. So I've heard that a little bit throughout the community, and I just want a point of clarification from the team. Is that me? Is everybody on mute? So it's not me? Okay. Is that better? So I just wanted to just double check, because everything that we've been presented and everything that I trust has come from the team here that I'm seeing that's providing this wonderful information to us. So can we just clarify whether we're back in school or virtual, we can afford to do what we need to do appropriately?
Ms. Kiefer, I'll answer that, and if Mr. Hawkins would like to clarify, that is not true. We would be able to operate under any of the four options. So there's really three options. Option 4 is in 1 and 2, but we would be able to, on a financial point of view, be able to operate. Now, one, CDC, 6 feet apart, those issues, a lot of concerns. Financially, no concerns with any of the options. And if Mr. Hawkins would like to clarify, he can add.
No, I think that's correct. You did a good job.
Thank you. I feel better now. A couple of things. I too have been one of the board members that have raised a lot of questions about our special ed. It sounds like we're also potentially talking about ESOL teachers. Is that correct? If we're saying to provide services in person? I know we kind of, I just wanted to clarify it's both. And I know that, it's hard to predict how many folks we're talking about, whether it's teachers. I assume you would need the SROs in schools if we have people coming in at all. You'll have, we've discussed that you would need cafeteria workers, et cetera. But I don't know if at the highest range of the number of people or administrators or SROs that we would have in a building, what's the average number of people? Because I'll just say this, I look at things through an equity lens. So if we're making a decision about one thing, we have to just make sure we're looking at the whole. So I'm just trying to get a sense of if we're asking some to come in, which I understand the very, very, very legitimate reasons. So don't get me wrong on my questioning. I'm just trying to get a sense of the magnitude. If everybody decided in those groups to be in, what are we talking about?
Well, we would have to go through and get with case managers. When we talk about education, we're not talking about every student that has an IEP. It is the number of students that we have that we cannot fulfill their services through a virtual platform. Same thing with level 2 students. If we can do it safely and we can get them in, but the goal would be to get as many as possible on the virtual level, but those that can't would be the ones that need to come in. So as far as a number, I don't feel comfortable with a number because I don't know, but we would not bring in a large group of staff or students because that just simply would not be safe. And again, as I mentioned earlier to Mr. Albrecht, we would have to go back to how we would address this issue if it is the board's wishes to have truly 100% virtual without bringing in those students. We would struggle meeting IEP goals and services, but we would do the best we can to do what's right for those students while keeping those students and the staff safe, which I know is the priority of this board, and it is our priority as a central office staff. We want our staff and our students to be safe. So I do understand that. Again, we were just trying to be in compliance as best we could with the reopening guidance that we received. In that guidance, it also said in phase two, I believe, that you could bring in from pre-K to third grade, as well as level 1 and level 2. But if we went from pre-K to third grade and level 1 and level 2 and the SPED students, I can tell you we would probably be beyond the 25% and probably close to the 50%. And so if that's not safe, bringing in pre-K to third grade on top of our SPED and our level 1 and level 2 just was not doable.
Appreciate that. Chair, can I just do one more and then I'll move on to the people who probably have even better questions than I'm even putting.
Go for it. Thank you.
Thank you. So this board, we like food. So I'm going to go to the question about the meals. If I understand it, if we go virtual, we're thinking, if I read my materials appropriately, that we would still be trying to get breakfast and lunch to the students via pickup. Question about that, because I was trying to reconcile it with the schedule, the proposed schedules for, how the virtual would work. And so when was the time factored in when the children would have to go pick up the lunches in the academic schedule? And a secondary question, and then I really will mute myself for a while, is there a possibility or has there been a consideration that if that might be a little dicey in terms of the scheduling and the getting the kids back to get to the next lesson, would bus drivers potentially be able to deliver meals? So that's my question.
So I can answer some of the schedule questions, and I think Andy or Dr. Newman might want to grab the food service questions. So the schedules were samples, and ultimately we would be very flexible with how we utilize those schedules. And I think Andy and Dr. Newman have some other ideas about how potentially meals could be provided. So I'll let them jump in. But certainly those were sample schedules. We could adjust to be flexible and meet the needs of the kids.
Well, certainly the schedule way of delivery of food. I mean, we want all of our students to receive the food. So we would change our schedule, or we would work hand in hand with Dr. Saunders and her team to be able to provide the meals in a way that was most advantageous for the students to be able to get them and still continue on with their instructional day.
And Ms. Kiefer, to answer your question about would using our drivers as delivery be an option, that is something that we discussed in March during the first closure, and we decided against that that the safest way was to have the 3 locations at the school, but we are willing to revisit that.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Great questions. Next, Mrs. Seberg, do you have any questions about anything at all dealing with the options?
I did have a question, but Dr. Saunders already answered it as far as the difference between 3 and 4, but it led me to another question. If a parent selects, if we do option 1 or 2 and a parent selects option 4, but later wants to go in person, those class schedules will not match up, correct?
So, I mean, it depends on time and when those times would happen. We recommended they stay in the course or the opt-in for a full semester so that parents and students could reevaluate it, and then they would naturally fall into the next semester and be able to fall into their traditional schedule should they want to transition between the two. I got this question a lot through a lot of the Let's Talks or what have you. So, certainly we would encourage parents and families to meet with counselors and understanding that situations change and circumstances change, that those would have to be individual decisions at the school level to try to meet the needs. But yes, they might be on different pacing And they might be in different, like they wouldn't match up completely perfectly. First block wouldn't necessarily be what they were doing in the morning. And so there would be some transition for anyone who was going in and out of either one of those.
Very good. And then are we, Chairman Williams, are we commenting on our additional employees, our like support personnel?
Right now, what I like to ask any questions or clarifications you need. After all the questions or clarifications, we're going to go back around and have everybody comment on whatever they'd like to comment on.
Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Seibert. Mrs. Williams, any questions on anything at all?
I do have a question. I am just really a clarification, and then something Dr. Newman said confused me. I'm making the assumption that all the options staff put forth not only is financially viable, but also considers under the governor's guidance of the 6 feet. So whether we're 25%, so on option 2, if we're either 25% in capacity or 50%, we still can structure kids being 6 feet apart. Is that correct?
Ms. Williams, we have had several Zoom calls with RRMM. Monday, we had a call late that afternoon where they showed us some diagrams. They just didn't get them to us in time to share with the board, where it showed a 6-foot distance with 25% as well as with 50%. It was doable, but of course, if you, it was really tight, moving a lot of things out of the room.
Right. Okay.
To get it to work in the 50% model, in the 50% model.
Okay. Thank you. I just lost my train of thought. That's it. I think everything else has been answered. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. And if you have a question that comes up, just let me know and we'll have time to go back and circle back. Thank you. Ms. Stevens, any questions on any options or anything at all?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. We have been hearing in the news quite frequently that one of the issues of not having students physically in the building is they lack access to meals. And I know we have, as a school division, we've been working really hard to make sure that that's not an issue. Have we gotten any reports that we have families that are having a difficult time getting to our 3 meal pickup locations, or has that been really pretty smooth since March 13th?
I haven't received any concerns since March. When we first rolled it out, we did receive some concerns. Students maybe having to walk to the site and walking across busy highways. We were able to work with a couple of our communities with having it to divert that issue. And even when that option went away, we still had students coming in. Did not hear any concerns about families not being able to get there. We did have the one issue when we went to the first day of 5 meals at a time. And we had a bigger crowd than expected, and we had some issues that first day, but since then it's been smooth.
Have we made any decisions or gotten any further with the idea if we're in option 3 where we're 100% virtual for serving dinner? I know that in the Let's Talk, I think it was there have been so many questions on so many different platforms that I don't remember where it was, but I did read something about trying to get shelf-stable meals, and so I was wondering where that is.
Well, I think our food service director is concerned now about trying to figure out different options depending on which plan the board would take tonight. If the board goes with option 3, then we will continue to serve meals on Monday for 5 days. Won't be a problem. The concern we have is that if the board were to choose another, one of the hybrid options, 25 or 50%, would be providing meals for the students during the day that were there, and also providing meals to students who were home. And so how would that work? If the board chooses option 3 and we are pretty much 100% virtual, then we can concentrate our efforts on providing a dinner program. I think it'll be much easier for us to be able to do that if option 3 is selected. But if the other options are done, we're trying to serve meal in school that day and also serve meals to kids who are at home as well.
Makes sense. My next question, and Chairman Williams, I really like your idea of a monthly reassessment, regardless of what option we're on. Do we know what our matrix or parameters would look like for changing from a more restrictive setting to a less restrictive setting? Because I know there's a lot of concern that we don't want to get locked in to an entire school year in a more restrictive option than we need. So do we have, is there a specific plan or a specific way to look at where we are in that option so that we can quickly move to another option? Does that make sense?
It would be a combination of things, Ms. Stevens. You know, where are we at with the phases of the governor for our state? You know, are we still in phase 3? Or are we beyond phase 3? More importantly, you know, we get regular updates, almost daily updates of the number of cases in Manassas City. So we would weigh that on how our numbers are trending to make that recommendation to the board. So it wouldn't just be one thing. We'll be looking at, again, the reopening of the state, as well as how are the numbers in Manassas City. We are unique. We're 10 miles secluded, you know, all together. And if our numbers are, I think someone said we're number 2 in the state right now. You think about that in a 10-mile radius, you know, that's pretty stressful. And so I would think that we would want those numbers to go down before we even consider moving to a less restrictive environment.
And then my last question, several other school divisions are doing this, and I haven't heard any talk of it here from Manassas City, but several school divisions are bumping back their start date. I think Prince William County and Fairfax County, I believe, are bumping it to September 8th, regardless of what option they're going with. Do we have anything like that planned, or are we still planning on our firm start date?
I have talked to Chairman Williams about this. We've talked to the staff about this. If a hybrid model is selected, we would recommend to the board to move our start date back to September 8th. If the 100% virtual option is selected, we do have a concern about August 17th. Our Chromebooks, and I don't know if Mr. Barrett would want to touch on this to give additional information, but there's a 50-50 chance right now from what we were told that we would be able to get those Chromebooks here on time. So I would ask for a week or 2 from the board to ensure that we will be able to give all of our students the devices they would need for the 100% virtual option.
I lost my train of thought for a second. Okay, now it's back. If we change our start date, the rest of our school calendar will remain the same, as in our end date for the end of the school year will stay the same, as well as the end of the first semester being right there at the start for winter break. None of those other dates will change. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and final question, SOL testing. I have heard that some of the other school divisions are asking for waivers on SOL testing. Do you know where the state is on this, where we are on this, what the scoop is right now?
During one of our calls that we have on Tuesday morning with our state superintendent, of course, that question comes up a lot. And it's really two different questions. One is, will we have SOL testing? Two, will we have accreditation? The state controls the accreditation answer to that question, and DC will handle whether we have SOL testing. During our call, the state was more willing to work with our divisions on accreditation. We did not get that same sense that SOLs would be waived as they were in the spring of last year.
That was all my questions.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. I think Ms. Keeper had a question that she sent in the chat that you wanted to ask. So Ms. Keeper.
So I lied. I have one more. It's just a follow-on question. So there's the question of the monthly assessment of if we would kind of pivot to a different model if we were 100% virtual starting out the gate, right? My question is, and I only ask this because, you know, I'm preparing for reentry for an office that's much smaller and less complex than a school district, the simulation planning. So there's the numbers that we see, which, you know, there's the rise in cases, there's the hospitalizations, they're the things all of us should be looking at on a daily basis, frankly. The question is, there's a ramp up period to do the pivot. So if we came back in, say, September, October, let's just say September, do we even have a sense of what that ramp up period to even go to 25% might look like? And I know it's hard to put your finger on it because none of us know exactly what we're doing in this crazy. I'm trying to get a sense of if we made that decision, then how long could it potentially be before we would get the kids back in school? And I don't know if that came up. I'm sure you guys have had so many conversations. So I just wanted to follow on with that, if that makes sense.
Dr. Saunders, did you want to address that, or I can?
Sure. You know, certainly we would need some time to reacclimate our teachers and organize our students. You know, ultimately, our principals and our staffs are already preparing kind of for all of the models, right? They're in that process. So they would continue to prepare that along with trying to start whatever we are doing. Certainly if we're in virtual, it might be a little bit easier to then prepare. But to go backwards, that might take time. So I think we'd also have to consider where were we in the actual pacing? Are we close to the end of a 9-week period? Are we close to a semester? Are we close to some natural breaks that are in the academic calendar that might make more sense to transition? And so I think those are all the things that we'd have to consider. And knowing that in each of your board meetings or every 4 weeks, you were all coming back around and having those conversations, we could certainly look from that point and be able to say, you know, this would be a good time if any changes were going to be made. So it's not a definitive answer, but it does give you, I think, from the instructional side, and probably, you know, Mr. Hawkins might answer from the operational side, just as many instructional things that have to happen. The operational things have to happen, and the human resources pieces have to happen, and the technology pieces have to happen. So I think we would all need a little bit of some leeway, as you said. Does that answer to some degree?
Thank you.
Okay, I know that Robin had, I think, a question, then Mr. Albrecht. So Mrs. Williams, then Mr. Albrecht.
Oh, no, I didn't have an additional question.
Okay, sorry about that. I saw the little mark in your section. Thank you, though. Mr. Albrecht.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify a couple of things I think were said. When Ms. Stevens asked about the calendar, did I hear correctly that the staff recommendation, whether we go to either one of the two option 2s or option 3, is to delay the start of school?
Yes, Mr. One would be a little longer than the other. If we were going to go the hybrid model, we would want to push it till September 8th. I would ask for a little grace period if we go the online, just to ensure that we can get all the devices in. And then not only once you get them in, then, Mr. Barrett and his staff will have some things to do to make sure that the device was ready for our students.
Thank you. And then there's a quick discussion on SOLs, accountability, whatever buzzword we want to say. I think I heard you say, Dr. Newman, that likelihood, while the state will be flexible on accreditation, all indications are the federal government will require Virginia to still have all SOLs.
The last time this was discussed in our meetings, that is what we were told, that as of right now, at the federal level, the SOL testing is not being discussed as being waived for this year. But Dr. Lane said that he believed that we would have some flexibility with accountability, with accreditation.
Thanks. And my last question gets back to the state, and it's requiring a crystal ball. And I apologize, but based upon some conversation we've had, if we start out option 3, 100% virtual, and who knows what might change, and clearly we may indicate that we have issues with staff, whatever, would the state be flexible and allow us to finish the year, whether we want to or not, just because we physically can't, in option 3, 100% virtual?
Just to make sure I'm clear with your question, are you asking, would the state be okay with us being in 100% virtual for the year?
That's correct.
That is not a question that we've asked, so I am not sure of their answer. I just know that we have to submit our plan to the state 15 days before the start of the school year. How often that has to be updated, I'm not sure. That's never been clarified for us, but I can get that answer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And are there any other questions or clarifications needed before we have our comments? If there aren't, I'm going to ask Mr. DeMaria to make another motion, and then we'll have more discussion. But before we do that, I'm going to use the chairperson's prerogative. I have a quick question, and hopefully the board will be amenable to this. Because there's so much going on, our next meeting is scheduled on August the 14th. I realize we all have things going on, but I think it may behoove all of us if we could have a meeting maybe like 2 weeks roughly. So no matter what option we choose tonight, we can get an update about where we are, and we have some kind of discussion about going forward, as opposed to waiting a month to getting together to talk about what's going on. So I realize that may be a stress for staff, and I apologize, but hearing everything and hearing all the questions, I think waiting 4 weeks may be a little bit too long to August 11th for us to get back together again, even if it's a brief meeting to kind of discuss where things are standing. Does that make sense to everybody generally? Okay, so after tonight, tomorrow, the next day, Mrs. Garza, if you could work with Dr. Newman to help get us a meeting set up in about 2 weeks roughly, so we can have, a status update and kind of discuss how things are going and get on the same track, find out about the Chromebooks and lots of other things that are going on, because there's so many moving pieces and this is so important. I really don't want us to wait another month to get together. So I apologize for that interruption. Thank you for your time, and I will turn it over to Mr. DeMaria for a motion. And after the motion, we'll have discussion with the comments that I'm sure folks have.
Okay, this motion will supersede my last motion, if that's okay with the seconder, and I don't remember who it was. I move that the school board of the city of Manassas approve option 3 with the stipulation that staff and the board revisit our options at least once a month, and that we have updates at each meeting. I hope that covers what we were talking about.
Second.
I think I have a motion by Mr. DeMaria and a second by Mrs. Williams. I believe I heard her voice first. That we approve option 3 and that we discuss each option at least once a month with updates at each board meeting. Okay, is there any discussion? Okay, so what I plan to do is I'm going to go back around in the same order. I know I prepared comments. We'll all have a chance to make comments, and after the comments, if we don't alter any of the things we talked about, we'll vote. I would ask in your comments, it'd be helpful if you could at least mention or address the special ed component that was brought up and the ESOL component, because Mrs. Kiefer brings up a great point about an equity lens and how we obviously want to comport with the law and do things that are best for our students, but we also want to be mindful of all the actions that we take and be mindful of how they impact each other, because nothing is done, in the vacuum. So I will start with Mr. Albrecht with comments, and after Mr. Albrecht, I will go around and have everyone make comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really don't have prepared comments because I wanted to hear the discussion. It's clearly a serious subject we're talking about. I have a lot of personal reservations about option 3 from an accountability perspective, from is it what's right for students perspective. I almost think it's the easy answer. I really think students need to be in the classroom so they can learn. And that doesn't matter if they're LEP, if they're special ed, or if they're general ed. I'd love to see us try to get to the 50% number, 2 days a week for class, 1 day remote, the option that was presented. Even though we're calling it 50, let's face it, it's really only 40% for the student. 2 out of 5 days a week. The other option at 25%, and I think there's been some talk of modification of that, where it'd be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday cleaning of the school day, Thursday, Friday instruction. I think I read that in one of the answers somewhere, maybe I didn't. I think I can also support, but when I look at the option that we're voting on, and I think of the students, and I think of all the questions we've had, all of the things we maybe kind of sort of can do, and we all recognize at a significantly reduced efficacy. And that's just not good for student achievement. And I really worry, especially with our elementary ed kids, that we're setting ourselves up across the state, not just in Manassas, for a generation of failing schools. We've got to make sure we teach the little kids and get them, have them keeping the fundamentals of education they need, have them reading, having them do everything they need to build the foundation. So in quickness, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Albrecht. Next, Mr. DeMaria.
Thank you, sir. I pretty much agree with everything Mr. Albrecht said, except I have reservations about every option that we've got sitting here. I've got reservations about everything. My senior class English teacher, Mrs. Kaminsky, would be proud of how much I've read in the last 4 months, and especially in the last 2 weeks. And the more I read, the more I realize that I can't, in good conscience, vote to send anybody back into a building in Manassas. If I were in Warrenton or Culpeper, I'd have other options, other thoughts. Our numbers are so extremely high. Our population is a very vulnerable population to this. Of all the let's talks we've got and all of this other stuff we've gotten, I so deeply appreciate everybody's opinion. So many have been kind words to us, knowing what we're going through. Nothing like a student is going through or a parent, but this is very difficult. I do have a little bit of problem with some of the letters we got accusing us of not caring about parents and not caring about anything. This is a very caring board, and we have done our very best to educate ourselves. I know all 7 of us have been looking at many different platforms to gain as much information as we possibly can. I've started watching BBC news because it's unbiased, I think. Trying to get as much information as I can, looking at numbers, looking at the science. And that's why I will be supporting this motion. And that's why I'm still scared about the SPED and the ESOL kids going back into the building with the kids and the teachers. I'm just very, very concerned about it. But I am also very confident that this staff from top to bottom, top all the way across, are going to be able to handle whatever we decide. But I will be voting yay on this. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. DeMaria. Mrs. Keeper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's good news and bad news here. We've all been kind of working through this together. And the one thing that I'll say, the good news, this is probably the best attended school board meeting since I've been on the board. So thank you to all who are, I know, intently watching out here. It's a really important issue. It's a tough issue. And I know many of you have a lot of sympathy for the position that we're all in, which is a really hard one to be in. I think the other good news, and I just want to say, we ask a lot of tough questions of staff who think on their toes, but I think everybody can see, not just from the folks on our screen here tonight, but all of the task force who put time, which included community, it included parents, it included guardians, it included staff. I think I might be wrong on some of that. But nonetheless, it included so many people and so many people who really know what is best and what we could do or not do. And I really feel like the information that came out of this was well thought out. It was thorough. These folks have taken questions from us nonstop since we got that presentation, up until probably about 5 minutes before our last meeting. Dr. Noonan was entertaining me. So I just want to thank you, and I want to thank everybody who has gotten us to the point that no matter where it goes, I have full confidence and will support any decision that is made tonight. And I have full confidence that no matter what option it is, that this team and everybody that we hire in those buildings, on those buses, in our cafeterias will deliver if we are in person. So I just want to be on the record that thank you for that. I also want to say one other thing that's more personal. A lot of people can say, don't vote because of your politics in this. And I just want to say that I know these group of individuals. This decision will not be based on any of our views on who thinks we should do what in politics. This board is compassionate. This board doesn't give in to outside pressure at all. I can guarantee you that all of us are here for the right reasons. All of us are here to try to make the decision we think is best. I can guarantee you we've all read that 83-page PowerPoint 25 times. I can tell you we've all read the Let's Talk questions that come in addition to the emails. We've done our research. I've actually had to be on the phone listening to Tim and what he's learning on BBC. We've talked to each other. We've talked to you. So however this pans out, guys, I'm just glad we've had a dialogue as a community. Bad news is, and I speak for myself as a mother, a school board member, and an advocate for the kids, the staff, and our community. This is truly the hardest decision probably any of us as school board members will make. And it stinks. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I know for myself, it's kept me up at night for weeks, literally. I've gone back and forth in my mind on what's right, what's best. We all mean well, but we're all going to stand behind whatever the decision's going to be. And the bad news is, doesn't matter what we say tonight, there's never going to be a right answer. So I just thank you all for your engagement. I thank you all for tuning in, and tuning in tonight. I just want to thank you all here and everybody who's put these plans together, because it is such a hard task, and it was unexpected, so thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kiefer. Mrs. Seberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be speaking in support of option 3. Make my decision based on what we value most, the people in our MCPS family, our students and our staff. The safety and well-being of our staff and our students and their families is more important than the reopening of schools in person at this time. Option 3 offers a connection with our teachers and staff in a safe as possible environment. Option 4 is also safer than options 1 and 2, but it does not include the relationship building with our teachers that is so special and vital to our students for learning. Option 3 also provides a good starting point when we are ready to move towards a less restrictive option. I know that the work by the task force in preparing for a hybrid model will be essential when we are ready, when the metrics have improved, and when we return to in-person school. I acknowledge that option 3 is not ideal for some reasons. In some situations, parents will need to find childcare. It won't be the same connection as meeting face-to-face, and engagement will be more challenging. These matters have to take a backseat to health and safety. For the virus right now, the city of Manassas is a hotspot for positive cases in Virginia. City of Manassas is #1 for infection rate in the Northern Virginia region, and we are in need of more free testing and in need of further health education. Therefore, it would be irresponsible to utilize options 1 or 2, any form of in-person schooling at this time. Sending our students and teachers into a school before we have more control over the spread of this virus would be irresponsible. I can appreciate the plans that have been made to ensure safety going back into school, but now is not the time. We do not know enough about this virus and how we would perform in school during this pandemic. We cannot assure safety for the kids. It is not safe for the school staff and the teachers. It is not safe for the community and the families that they come home to. They'll be learning for the rest of their lives, and within a couple years, hopefully, we'll remember that there was no in-person school. But hopefully we won't remember missing any learning. Some things are reversible, other things are not. Getting behind in schoolwork or below grade level is reversible. Temporary and permanent health issues are not reversible. Many of the questions that I had were answered with repeated review of the content from last week. So thank you again to the task force and staff for your thorough presentation and for addressing our follow-up questions. Additionally, thank you to the community for sharing your comments, your questions and suggestions, and all your concerns, and for the quick response by staff. For the community, the reason why we are going through all these options, every angle, asking for survey room, and listening to your concerns and input is because we care about our families, our staff, and our students, and the education they receive. We want to make the best decision possible for students, staff, and families. No one will be 100% happy, and we appreciate you for staying involved and informed the process. Whatever this outcome, let's view this as an opportunity to do better, think differently, be creative, and shine as an independent, dynamic, and caring community that can rise to this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Seberg. Mrs. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to concur with everybody's comments, thanking staff, thanking all the hard. We've got so much more work to do even after we choose an option we are going to move forward with tonight. I have hesitation about option 3 for many of the same reasons Mr. Albrecht has. I'm really worried about the equity piece of this entire puzzle and accountability. Even if students can get into the school once a week, it kind of grounds them and gives them a little bit more accountability. I look at Governor Northam and his phase 3. He feels like Virginia's in phase 3, and he feels like, as a pediatrician himself, if we can truly do this in a safe manner, keep our distance of 6 feet, we can return to school safely. So I hold a lot of weight on that as well. I'd also like to point out that if students in school promptly identify the coronavirus cases, they volunteer that they quarantine themselves should they be positive, and monitoring of the COVID-19 contacts can really truly affect the break of the chain of the disease itself and transmission and prevent further spread of the virus. And I've gotten this from the VDH, the Virginia Department of Health, the child and parent guardians, and schools' child care programs. So if this in fact is correct, perhaps some in-school accountability, testing, asking the questions, are you sick, do you have a sore throat? Perhaps some of those things are important, and perhaps that will help keep the spread locally. I haven't heard anybody mention that, and I found that, and I just thought that was interesting. I'm not a doctor, but I believe this to be true. So I would probably prefer to go option 2, and it sounds like to me the 25% might be best, so we can truly keep that 6 feet. I've heard a couple doctors say that they're not seeing a lot of transmission from 3 feet to 6 feet. However, I would feel more comfortable with 6 feet. I also wanted to point out that Dr. Jennifer Leiter had mentioned that, I'm just find my notes now, I've got so many. Children apparently don't really transmit this disease from child to child, nor child to adult. It's more so adult to adult. That's what they're finding. So if that's to be true, then I really think we're safe to go back to school 1 day a week. And I'm going to leave it there because we've already had so many previous fantastic comments. And I think everybody knows we've all worked really hard, stayed up all day, all night, reading, researching. I know every single one of us on this board have done this, and we have worked really hard, and we do really care. And I'll give it right back to you, Chair Williams.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Williams. I have a doctor here in the background who's trying to tell me something, so I'll hear what she says while I listen to Mrs. Stevens talk. Ms. Stevens.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. I'm in favor of option 3. First of all, I want to thank all the parents, staff members, students who emailed or submitted questions and comments concerning the 4 options for the start of the 2021 school year. I want to also thank the Manassas, the MCPS Forward Task Force for the work they've done and the time they've taken to answer all or almost all of the questions presented. The decision to vote in favor of starting the 2021 school year virtually was not an easy decision to make. There is no perfect choice that will meet the needs of all stakeholders. While we voted in favor of starting the school year virtually, it is my hope that the MCPS Forward 2020 Task Force will continue to work towards identifying additional supports for our students, their families, our staff, and especially for those parents who are struggling with juggling work and online instruction for their children. Many factors were considered as I worked through deciding which option to vote for. The first was the CDC's recent announcement that Manassas City is a COVID hotspot. This indicates that the virus is not under control and could likely worsen without significant safeguards in place. The second factor I considered is the fact that Manassas is ranked 9th out of 133 cities and counties in the Commonwealth for the total number of positive COVID cases. I also took into account the survey that was shared at our last school board meeting. According to the survey, 50% of our staff members indicated they would be personally in a high-risk situation, and 65% indicated that someone in their immediate family would be in a high-risk situation if exposed to COVID. These metrics, when viewed together, indicate to me that it is not currently safe to offer in-person instruction for the start of the 2020 school year. It is my hope that as the city works to reduce the number of cases, we will slowly be able to work towards offering in-person instruction this school year. But as of today, it is simply not in our best interest to risk the health of our students, staff, and community members. And you asked us if we could take a minute to address our special education population and our English language learner population. If we're just looking at level 1s and 2s, as far as English language learners are concerned, this is a very small portion of the population, of the overall population, and these are students who require specialized instruction to access the curriculum that everyone else is able to independently access. For our special education students, the students who would need the additional instruction are also students who require that additional instruction, those additional supports to adequately, access the general curriculum. So it's not to give them a leg up on their peers, it's to level the playing field so that they have the opportunity to be as successful as their peers. As far as special education students are concerned, it's determined on a case basis who needs additional instruction, who needs more time, who needs greater interventions. So it's not the entire population. I hope that helped answer those questions on the special education and English language learner population.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. And being an attorney, I have tons of pages of comments here, so I apologize in advance. I really all took it seriously, and for me, taking it seriously is not only researching, but just what I do, writing. So hopefully I'm not too wordy. I'm going to start off with a personal story, and then in my final comments, I have a brief personal story I'll mention as well. Hopefully this helps inform people, but here goes. Dr. Lorna Breen was a healthy 49-year-old physician who worked at New York Presbyterian Allen Hospital in Upper Manhattan. She's described in a recent article as gifted, confident, clever, unflappable. She had something that was a little bit different, said her colleague and friend, Dr. Barbara Locke. In March of this year, Dr. Breen went on vacation with her family, and she returned to work on March 14th in New York. Sometime thereafter, Dr. Breen, a healthy 49-year-old, contracted COVID-19. After recuperating, she went back to work but was not the same. And in April, Dr. Breen came home to Charlottesville, Virginia, and took her life. Her death affected me a lot, not just because she's close to my age and attended Cornell University like my wife and I did, or because she worked as a physician at New York Presbyterian like both my son and daughter-in-law currently do and did back then. It was especially hard for me because I know her sister, Jennifer, and I'm a friend of her brother-in-law, Corey. Corey mentioned to me that they think COVID really affected Lorna's brain and her personality. They have decided to honor her memory through a foundation to help mental health for health professionals. This brought home to me very clearly, starkly, that if a healthy, relatively young physician could end up like this, we really do not know the extent of damage COVID can cause. Now I start with this story because it's pertinent to my discussion. We often posit that people like us who make decisions should look at facts in an objective fashion, and I think we do. But as an attorney, I know that justice is supposed to be blind, but human beings inevitably incorporate their experiences and biases in their decision-making. And Lorna's story is definitely a part of my decision-making. Even with this knowledge, I spent hours doing research, talking to teachers, students, parents, and physicians to help make the most informed decision I could possibly make on returning to school. I am now sure about a few things. One, as has been said, this is not an easy decision. Two, there is no right decision. Three, we need to do all that is humanly possible to get our students back in school as soon as practically possible. And number four, no matter which option we choose, we are likely to make use of more than one option during the upcoming school year. I thank Dr. Newman and the staff for the detailed plan they presented to us last week. They did an incredible job of synthesizing a lot of information in a short time frame. And I've talked to other boards, and they did not get what we got. So I thank you for your work. It was excellent. I appreciate their diligence, their dedication, and their professionalism. And I thank our central office staff for answering the board's questions from staff, and even tonight on the hotspot, they answered capably. I appreciate it. Finally, I want to thank the many staff members, parents, and members of the community who have reached out to me with their feedback and are texting me even as I talk. After all this contemplation, my vote will be that in the best interest of our students currently, With great consideration for our staff, families, and communities, we start off this school year with the full distance learning, option 3, with the directive to staff, we continuously and work on our plans to get students back in the classroom as soon as possible. The American Academy of Pediatrics, the AAP, has come out strongly in favor of schools having students return to classroom in the fall. The guidance asserts that the importance of in-person learning is well documented, and that evidence already has emerged of negative impacts on children due to school closures in the spring. Science should drive decision-making on safely reopening schools. They add that public health agencies must make recommendations based on evidence, not politics. We should leave it to health experts to tell us when the time is best to open up school buildings and listen to educators and administrators to shape how we do it. I could talk about this for hours, but in the interest of time, I will try to distill my thoughts into a few cogent points. 1, and I hear this a lot, we must take COVID seriously. I have talked to several people, and my wife as well, even in her practice, who don't think it's serious. To me, after going through what we've gone through, it's unbelievable and appalling. You may not know anybody who's been affected, and if you are very blessed, and I hope that never changes. But look at the numbers, it's real. I mentioned Lorna earlier. Anastasia and I have family members and friends who also had COVID. Unfortunately, they are all okay at the moment. If we don't take COVID seriously, we have no business putting our children, teachers, and communities at risk by opening schools. And as an aside, I want to remark that there's no shame in having COVID. I know folks who've had COVID who've been kind of shamed by people they've dealt with. It's not something that you can control. It's a virus, not a negative personality trait. The second point, the infection rate, we need to get it down. The key question is not how to safely reopen schools amid high viral transmission, but how to keep community transmission low enough that schools are safe. That might mean keeping other venues like bars and restaurants closed, but we need to get the infection rate down. The rates in Northern Virginia have started to go up again, and more directly, the cases per capita are higher here in Manassas than any neighboring jurisdiction. We have to decrease the rate. Third point, SEL, or social emotional learning. The devastating impact on SEL is tangible and potentially devastating to a lot of our kids. Mr. Albrecht has capably remarked, and he's right on point, we're losing a lot of educational progress, and that's a tragedy. There are serious issues which really need to be addressed and make it urgent for us to get students back in school as soon as possible. We must balance that with safety. We must lower the infection rate, incorporate testing, tracing, and temperature checks to give us the best chance possible. And I appreciate the effort that we're making to help our special ed population and other students who are most affected. We need to work together to make sure that we help them as well. Children, especially young children, are usually asymptomatic and don't transmit the disease as easily as adults. My doctor here in the background who's listening on YouTube told me I should remark that the point that Ms. Stevens made, I believe was Ms. Williams made, except that children do not transmit it. Young children do not transmit it as easily as adults do. That's totally correct. However, the bigger fear is older children to adults or adults to younger children. Because if adults transmit to younger children and they're asymptomatic and if they don't know, when these younger children go home, they can transmit it to their grandparents or someone in their house, compromised, which will still cause issues. So though it's correct that younger children don't transmit as much, there are still things that flow from that if they're in the school environment. And some children, though not many in Northern Virginia yet, when I checked on the website yesterday, it was 6, but there's something called MIS-C, MIS.C, a multi-inflammatory system condition in children, which can have many deleterious effects on children. It usually presents weeks after COVID, and I actually heard of it from my son in New York, who saw patients who had COVID, were asymptomatic and got really sick, and we've seen those cases around the world. So even though kids aren't usually affected initially, we don't know the long-term ramifications on them. Our staff survey concluded that 65% of our staff agree or strongly agree that someone in their house could be in a high-risk situation. We need to pay attention to that and evaluate that when we go back to school in whatever capacity we go back. I'm getting close to the end here. Money was mentioned before. Money's not a factor in our options. Money will not dictate what we do. The economy. We need to get the economy going. We definitely do, but we need to also balance that with preserving lives and keeping people safe. I've heard folks mention other countries going back to school successfully, and that is correct. However, they've had an infinitely better infection rate, meaning they've done a better job of lowering their rate before they went back to school. We need to do that in order to be like them. We want to get creative. I read a couple of epidemiologists who stated that activities in some other sectors of the economy will need to be reduced to preserve education. I'm not sure how that will interact, but we need to look at all things, not just schools. Something else that was mentioned, parents need to work. They do. I know, I agree. I'm a parent, my kids are grown, but I totally understand that. Every day, I know there are parents who are truly struggling with trying to make ends meet and teach their kids. That's harsh, I want to help them. But I have to admit, I'm struck by the fact that some, not all, but some, see schools as a babysitting service. Over the years, schools have continuously and exponentially taken on greater responsibilities than they were intended to, because society, and not us, but society in general, in my opinion, has been derelict in responsibilities. Our school staff has become doctors, counselors, providers of supplies, providers of food, and social workers. It's too much. Schools and teachers should not have to shoulder society's burdens on their shoulders alone. Our federal government and state government should be leading the way with innovative solutions. Maybe we can have buildings which can provide distancing so teachers can teach children in buildings other than our schools, or at least supervise virtual learning. Maybe we can have outdoor classrooms with tents when the weather is amenable. There's so many things we can try, but we need to do it together, and we can't place the responsibility on the schools. I encourage our staff to work with our city council, our state government, the Department of Ed, the health department, and local businesses to try to devise some creative solutions. We can't make the virus magically disappear, but America is known for its ingenuity, its dexterity, and its problem solving. We can do anything we put our minds to. The last thing I'll end with right now is one of my favorites, but which is pertinent, I think, the play Hamilton, which has a line which says, who lives, who dies, who tells your story? Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? The story of history is written, but it's evidenced by this nation's re-examination of our founding and Confederate statutes that story can change. What was once depicted as truth has been revealed to be false. The story of COVID-19 has yet to be fully written. It has taken lives, devastated economies, destroyed businesses, and shaken communities. We must understand that there's no guarantee that an effective vaccine is imminent. So we may be operating in this predicament for a while. And with several recurring infections of folks who've already had COVID, had it gone away, and had it again, we can't rely on herd immunity. It does not matter your race, your party, your political belief, or your gender. We are not immune from COVID. It is clear that by listening to scientists, wearing masks, and doing all we can do to protect ourselves and each other, we can at least stem the virus surge so we can open up our schools, our economy, and have some approximation of what used to be normal. And Alexander Hamilton, the real Hamilton, said, "I never expect a perfect work from an imperfect man. We are not perfect, so our plans won't be perfect. But I promise that we in MCPS will do all we can to try to do what's best for our citizens, our students, and our families." So I apologize for the length of that. I just really wanted to address all I could, but I will end it there. So with that, I believe we have a motion on the table. I will ask the maker of the motion if he wants to amend it in any way or talk about anything else before I put it to a vote.
Thank you, sir. I do want to get some clarification about the necessity of possibly changing our start date, but I think that can be in another discussion after we vote on this one, I believe. If that's okay with you, I think once we get done with this, we can talk about that.
Okay, that works. So I will repeat the motion on the table. The motion by Mr. Maria. I have a second by Mrs. Williams, but Ms. Seberg, were you the one that seconded it? Because I didn't see my head was down. I thought it was Mrs. Williams.
I think it was Mrs. Stevens, wasn't it? Was it?
Ms. Stevens? Okay, I have Ms. Williams down. Okay.
I don't know.
I will leave it at Mrs. Williams because my head was down when I wrote down.
Okay. It was not me, so it was.
It wasn't? Okay, so, all right, well, I want to get this correct. Ms. Stevens, Ms. Seberg?
Which one?
I don't remember actually.
Okay, so let's do this again. I have a motion by Mr. Maria. Mrs. Seberg, can you be the second?
Sure.
Okay, motion by Mr. Maria, second by Mrs. Seberg to approve option 3 with full distance learning with an evaluation of all options once a month and updates at each board meeting. Is there any further discussion? If not, Mrs. Garza, may you take a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Chairman Williams,
Aye.
Vice Chairwoman Kiefer,
No.
Mr. Demaria,
Aye.
Mr. Albrecht,
No.
Mrs. Seberg,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
No.
Mrs. Stevens.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Garza. The motion carries 4-3, 4 ayes to 3 noes. So we have approved option 3 with full distance learning with an evaluation of all options once a month and updates at each board meeting. So before we get to board comments, Mr. Maria brought up a point. So Mr. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Newman brought up the fact that we may not have the computers ready for September 17th. I don't know if that means we need to delay a week or two, but I don't think that we need to leave our parents hanging. They need to know what the start date is. I'd rather not wait another 2 weeks to try and come up with that. So I would like to get some feedback from Dr. Newman and maybe Mr. Barrett as to when we feel confident that we'll be ready to start. And if it's a possibility that we start distributing before our new start date, if we have a new start date.
Mr. Mary, I do want to clarify the laptop issue, the Chromebook issue was just one reason for the request to postpone the start date. We also want to give our teachers enough time to plan, get our, if we're going to bring students in, to get their devices and have them set up. I think from talking to staff, August 31st, which would be 2-week delay from our August 17th start, would be doable. I don't want anyone to think that the Chromebook delay, because that may get here. We're not sure. From the vendor, they told us it was a 50-50 chance that we would have it in time to start on August 17th. But we would also like to give our staff enough time to plan, as well as to, again, give our parents the opportunity to plan as well.
So were you looking at the 31st then? Is that what you were thinking about for a start date?
Yes, sir.
And if it's okay, Mr. Chair, I'd ask another question. And that would give our teachers more time to prepare. And I just want to clarify that our teachers will definitely be able to use more time, such as the SPED teachers that I spoke to earlier. And if we delay 2 weeks, our teachers start when they were originally scheduled to start, if that's what we're speaking of, we will be able to end at the end of May as well, so that we don't have to add 2 weeks on to where our teachers are going to be working now another 14 days. If I can clarify that, sir.
That is the plan, sir, to start them on the 3rd with planning. Of course, it would be as much as virtual as possible to get them ready. And our goal would be to end the school year. I don't have the calendar in front of me, but to end on the scheduled May date.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, can I make a motion then?
Yes, please.
I move that the school board of the city of Manassas delay opening of the 2020-21 school year for students from the 17th of August to the 31st of August.
Second.
Okay, I was looking that time. Looks like a motion from Mr. Demaria, second by Mr. Stevens. Is that it? Yes. That we delay the start of school 2 weeks to August the 31st. Okay, is there any discussion? Mr. Albrecht.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I believe the motion we're voting on is only a 2-week delay in the start. Mr. Demaria raised some things that I realize this is a different year, but the state has requirements for the number of days of instruction. And I recognize whether it's virtual or not, what are we doing? We have contracts with all of our staff relative to number of days. So to Mr. Jamaria's point, I don't know how we can start late and end on time. Thank you.
Mr. Albrecht, Chairman Williams, if you don't mind me addressing that. Staff would still start on time, Mr. Albrecht. So their days, as far as their contract is concerned, would be the same. It's the student days that would not be the same that's in the current approved calendar.
I see questions. Albrecht, Mr. Albrecht, Mrs. Williams, any questions?
Yeah, I get the staff being 180 days, but what about instruction 180 days? I mean, no, that's not what I mean to say. I understand the staff contracts will remain the same, but still the students have to, we have that 180-day requirement for the C level, correct?
You have a 180-day or a 990-hour requirement.
Okay. That's the way we would make it out. Okay. And one more question, Dr. Newman, you're confident if we vote on August 31st now that will give staff enough time to do everything they need to do?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You don't want a couple days to make sure. Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Any further discussion or questions? If not, the motion on the table, motion by Mr. DeMaria, second by Mrs. Stevens, that we move the start of the school year date, school start date to August the 31st. If there's no further discussion, Mrs. Garza, may you please take a roll call vote?
Yes, Chairman Williams,
Aye.
Vice Chairwoman.
Aye.
Mr. DeMaria,
Aye.
Mr. Albrecht,
Aye.
Mrs. Seberg,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mrs. Stevens.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Garza. The ayes have it, and our school start date is moved to August the 31st, 2020. The last item on the agenda is school board comments. In case folks have other things they want to say or add, I'm going to go around and let folks make comments. And if you're tired of talking, you can just pass. But I will start with Mrs. Stevens.
Thank you. The decision to start school virtually, I think, was the hardest decision any of us have had to make. I know that I've done quite a bit of research, lots of reading, lots of lost hours of sleep coming to the decision. But I appreciate the work everyone has done in putting together all the plans. And I want to thank everyone who's part of the school board and all of our task force members for all the hard work they've done and the hard work that they're going to continue to do. And I feel we are on a pathway to success by reevaluating monthly the option that we've chosen and making changes as needed to best suit the needs of all our students. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Stevens. Mrs. Williams.
I concur with what Mrs. Stevens just said. I really, truly appreciate everybody's time, effort, whether we agree or not. In any event, we all will come together, staff, the board, parents, students, the community as a whole, and we will all get through this together. I am confident about that. And I am looking forward to this next school year, see what it brings.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mrs. Seberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no further comment. I think I stated everything I needed to say in my previous comments, but thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mrs. Seberg. Mr. DeMaria.
Thank you, sir. I believe we have a wonderful school system with wonderful people in it, and I think we're going to get through this. It's going to be difficult. It's going to take a lot of work. I appreciate all the comments we've got for and against all of the different options. It gave us a lot of information to think about, and then to go back to the science. If we've got a, I don't know if we still have a big group watching on YouTube or not. One of my concerns is SOLs, that we shouldn't have them in the first place. We definitely shouldn't have them this year. If you have the initiative, write to your to Senator Kane, Senator Warren, Representative Wexton, ask them to put forward legislation to get rid of high stakes testing for this year. It'd be wonderful if the state would do that, but the state can't do that unless it happens at the federal level. Now that we are going 100% virtual, we may also, from what a couple of people have said, we may lose federal funding. And at that point, if we're not getting any funding from the federal government, I guess we probably don't have to worry about what they say about high stakes testing. Go ahead and write a quick note to those three people and see if we can get something done at the federal level to take care of our children and the staff, and take some of the stress off that everybody's going to have this entire year. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Good points. Mr. Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd echo their comments that this clearly was a difficult decision. But I also suggest that this board has made the decision to delay the start of school 2 weeks and go start the school 100% virtual. And as a result, there's a whole lot more that has to be done so that we can be effective and educate children. And to the parents that are still watching, this is going to require your help. You will be key in making sure your child is doing the work from home that must be done if they're going to stay on level. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Albrecht. Vice Chairwoman Kiefer.
Yeah, I too think everyone's probably sick of hearing us talk, but I will say I stand behind, as I said earlier, the decision this board has made. I stand behind our teachers, and most of all, I stand behind our students. And I echo what Mr. Albrecht said. I think we all think that tonight was the hard part. Tomorrow's going to be harder. We've got a lot of work to do, and everybody who's developed the plans and spent their time developing now know the reality is coming. But we stand by you guys, but there's still going to be more decisions to be made as we go, and we're here to support you. So thank you, and thank you all for the hard work.
Thank you. I want to thank again the staff for their great work, their hard work, the parents, the families, for all their feedback. I know it's not going to be easy, but we're all in this together. I want to thank my fellow board members as well, because most board votes are not 4-3. It shows how hard this one was, but we worked together collaboratively, and we all took our time and our energy to try to do what we think is best for our kids and our staff and our community. So it's all we can do is the best we can do. I'm going to end up with a quick story, a story that kind of touched me, so hopefully it'll touch you, and it is quick. My wife, who I mentioned, Anastasia, is a pediatrician, and during COVID, she's been seeing patients in her office and electronically via telehealth. So she does both, some days in the office, some days via telehealth. I love my wife. She's incredible, and she loves her patients. She's one of the few people I know who really loves her job. Well, not the insurance part, but she loves her kids. She loves her job generally. When I asked her recently what she missed the most about operating under a pandemic protocol at work, so not doing what she normally does, she says she misses seeing many of her patients in person, and she misses giving them hugs. During this pandemic, she had an elementary school patient who was strictly instructed, after not seeing my wife for a couple months at least, that when she saw Dr. Williams, she could not touch her. She had to keep her mask on, stay on the table. When Dr. Williams came in the room, even though she usually gives her hugs, she can't interact with her. So nurse went in, did her thing, prepped the patient for my wife. My wife came in, and the patient dutifully sat on the table for a second. And then she saw my wife, she looked, she made a quick decision, and she jumped off the table, ran to Anastasia, ran to my wife, and she gave her a hug and would not let go. Of course, my wife said thoughts of COVID raced through her mind about touching this child because she knows that with this protocol, she can't touch kids. But she said what overwhelmingly came in her mind, I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget. She said she reveled in the genuine love and affection from a child who had not seen an adult in months and needed a hug from their favorite doctor. Our kids need to learn in person. They need love. They need interaction and affection. Let's work to help them get back to school in person as fast as we can and as best we can. That touched her, it touched me, and I hope it touches you. And we need to do what we can to get our kids back in school. So with that, I will end the meeting and ask for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move this meeting and ask this adjourned.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Kiefer, second by Mr. DeMaria. I saw him first, that we adjourn. Any discussion? May I have a roll call vote, please, Mrs. Garza?
Yes. Chairman Williams,
Aye.
Vice Chairwoman Kiefer,
Aye.
Mr. DeMaria,
Oh, heck yeah.
Mr. Albrecht,
Aye.
Mrs. Seberg,
Aye. Aye.
thank you. Mrs. Williams,
Yes, and maybe we all can get some sleep tonight.
Mrs. Stevens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Garza. Great job as usual tonight. Thank you for all who are here. I see Mr. Brent, Mr. Barrett, so Ms. Radford, Ms. Wingfield, Dr. Cramp, excuse me, Dr. Newman, and all school board members and Dr. Saunders. Thank you for your time. We are